Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Madeline Cowen. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm the grassroots organizer with Cady Wildlands. And I'm joined here with Nick. Nick, want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Nick Cady, he, him pronouns, and I'm the legal director of Cady Wildlands.
Awesome. So this is our comment writing workshop that we're giving to y'all today. And I have a little presentation that I'll go through, and then we can get to some questions at the end. Just gonna share. Oh. All right. So this is engaging in the NEPA process for proposed timber sales on public lands. And I just want to say right off the bat that I'm very new to this job and this position and this specific work. So I'm definitely not necessarily the most qualified person in the room right now to be talking about this, but I'm just going to speak from what I've learned from other people who've been doing this for a long time. And like many of you all, I was a volunteer for many years and kind of picked up things as a volunteer along the way. So this is a very open and engaging learning environment where we should all feel welcome to ask questions and learn with each other. And I definitely don't know everything, and neither does anyone. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. All right, so, oops, how did that work? Okay, so the basis for our public comments are based off of the National Environmental Policy Act. So this is also called NEPA, or a lot of people refer it to that and as that, and many of you probably know that already. And it basically is saying that forest managers who are looking after our public lands must put a hard look at the actions that may or may not affect the environment. It also must consider public input and evaluate multiple options in their analysis. So that's just like basic what NEPA is. And what I also learned today is that NEPA is also a name for this little critter on the screen, which is a water scorpion that can bite you and is about 2 inches long. And yeah, so there's a couple of NEPAs out there. And we engage in our, write our public comments based on the timeline that NEPA dictates for certain projects that are, so I understand a lot of us on the call today are really concerned about the Quartzville Middle Santiam sale in the Willamette National Forest. And so so I'll highlight where the QMS sale is within this process, but it's important that we understand how this timeline works. So basically it starts with scoping, which is the first time that the public can engage in a project. So that's 30 days of a public comment period. But this is already passed for the QMS sale. So this was a time when we can look at the initial documents that the agency is putting out, and this is when we can write our initial comments on it. And then after that, we kind of are in this waiting period, which we've been in for the last little while here, while we are waiting for the environmental assessment, the draft environmental assessment to be released from the agency. So that is what happened today with the QMS sale. The Forest Service released this environmental assessment and kicked off a 30-day public comment period. And this is a really important time for us to engage in the public process. So that's where we're in right now, just started. It's really exciting. Alternatively, sometimes projects will have an environmental impact statement, which requires more rigorous review of the environmental impacts, essentially. And that would require a 45-day public comment period. After that public comment period is closed, there will be a draft decision notice that will come out, and a final environmental assessment or final environmental impact statement. At that point, we can engage by an objection, which was previously called an appeal, I think. Oh yeah, it says right there. Yeah. And that is where we can, again, submit comments based off of their final environmental assessment. And after that, then they'll come out with the final decision, at which point we potentially will litigate against the sale. So there's a couple of kind of point, like scoping, everyone can comment on it. And then as the timeline goes through, if you don't submit comments on the environmental assessment, you basically then cannot submit comments again during the objection period. Is that correct, Nick?
Repeat that.
Sorry.
My cats are going nuts.
It's okay. So basically, if you miss the commenting on the environmental assessment period, you then cannot comment during the objection period, right?
Not necessarily. I think you can file an objection if you've done scoping comments, but not submitted comments on the EA sometimes. So I think it kind of varies too. But yeah, I think you can always file an objection. They can deny it for whatever reason they want. So regardless of whether you've submitted EA comments or you catch something late, you can always just file it and they can try to disregard it, but it'll be in there in part of the record.
Cool, thank you. So in addition to NEPA, there's also these other laws and policies that will guide the regulations. I'm not gonna dive into all of these, but it's important to consider these when we're thinking about holding our public agencies accountable. These are some examples of ways or laws and policies that agencies must abide to in order to best serve the public.
And real quickly, relevant here is the Northwest Forest Plan, right? Is the forest plan which will govern what QMS is going to be under. And the Northwest Forest Plan is actually, it's an amendment to the Willamette Forest Plan. And so there's two guiding plan documents that are applicable to the QMS project. And if any of the provisions in those plans conflict, the stronger provision controls. And so I know this is it's pretty complicated. It's been confusing lawyers who have decades of experience in this stuff forever, but that's kind of the regulatory regime.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so here's the bottom line. I mean, because we're not all lawyers, we don't all need to be kind of fully versed in all of the technicalities of everything. Just by participating as public residents here, we're really aiding the process. So bottom line, the agencies are legally required to consider our opinions, and they must announce the project plans and ensure that that the planning process allows for public participation. So I think so far with our experience working with the Sweet Home Ranger District folks who have been planning the QMS project, they have been great at providing opportunities for the public to engage and have conversations with them. So what are some best practices for writing our public comments? And I'm talking specifically about writing our comments on the draft EA. So these are just a couple of best practices. Be sure that you're clear to what project you're addressing. Focus on as specific elements of the proposal and the environmental analysis. So referring to specific parts of the EA in your comments. Be clear about what you do support, what you oppose, and what changes you would like to suggest in response to those proposed actions, activities, and alternatives offered. So, just being like very clearly saying, I support alternative 3, or that kind of thing. I oppose the use of shelterwood harvest prescription on unit 213 for this reason, or something like that. And then you also want to cite the pages of the EA, in this case, and refer to specific places by name or by cell unit number. So in that example, I just using the specific unit that you're talking about and being as specific as you can. It's important to be supportive of activities and ideas and the proposals that you like, in addition to the ones you oppose. That can be also helpful. Make sure you address your letter to the right person, include your contact information, including your address. And it's important to note that your comments will be part of the public record. So be sure to, don't put any personal information out there that you wouldn't want the public to read. And I wanted it to be less presentation style and more kind of like workshopping together style. So I thought we might go through, or I would just show a couple of examples of public comments, and then maybe we'll take a couple of questions there, and then we can dive into looking at the EA for QMS. But actually, do you want to just say a couple things about how our comments are used in litigation, Nick, before we go to the examples?
Yeah, sure. And I think your previous slide was about including kind of field checking data and information. So once we get to court, the evidence that we're allowed to rely upon is limited to what's called the administrative record. And so that is just things that have been submitted before the agency makes its final decision. And so we cannot, even if we have the world's premier spotted owl expert, we can't bring them into court and be like, no, the Forest Service is wrong about this, this, and this. We would have to have done that during the public comment period leading up to the project. So that's why it's super important for anybody and everybody to submit what they can and what they know and what they've seen on the ground during that administrative period. Otherwise, we can't rely, the lawyers litigating over these projects can't rely upon any of that. I mean, the other good reason for doing this, and this has happened a lot lately because of all the active on the ground field checking, but we've gotten projects to change. The Forest Service and BLM have regularly dropped units in response to us documenting kind of large old growth trees and documenting rivers that aren't on their map, or unique ecological features. The Forest Service and BLM is largely planning these projects by satellite using LiDAR, so they are not on the ground looking at these units. They'll do several, usually plot surveys, where they're looking at like a 5 by 5 foot plot, and do sprinkling those throughout a 5,000 acre area, and it's really not, they're not covering much of the actual ground. So to the extent that the field checking data can conflict with or contradict assumptions that they have in their environmental assessment documents, that's all great. And many times the Forest Service, without litigation, will just drop areas that they know are going to be problematic for them to justify. The other thing that these comments can help build a record or support for is standing. When we go to court, we have to prove that we have been to an area, we have concrete plans to return to that area, and what the Forest Service is doing in that area will harm our interests there. And so comments that you've been to an area like build evidentiary support for the standing assertions. Also, just as part of going to court, it's called administrative exhaustion. We need to comment and object to those sales along the way. So it's a necessary process to get to the courtroom if we want to legally try to stop a timber sale. It can also serve in the courtroom as a demonstration of public support or opposition to a project. If 700 people submitted comments in opposition, the judge is going to take note of that. You know, that's a reality. The other thing, a lot of people in comments tend to just zero in and try to make assertions. And I think a good thing, especially for comments in the scoping and EA period, is to really ask questions of the agency. Like if you do a deep dive, you can be like, well, why did you say this? Like, why do you make this assumption? Why do you analyze spotted owl effects across this 80,000 acre area instead of the project area? And you can start to pick apart. They have a mandatory duty to respond to your comments and respond to your questions. And so there's a good way to help in building an administrative legal record. It's good to ask questions that will prompt difficult responses by the agency as well. So these are all ways in which all of this helps us in litigation. And the other thing is, even if Great Old Broads or whoever isn't the entity ending up suing over the timber sale, right? Well, if it's just Cascadia Wildlands and Oregon Wild actually suing the Forest Service, we can use anything and everything that's in there by anyone. So all the work that you do is evidence that we can use. So it's all useful regardless. Yeah, and that's all I got there.
Yeah, thank you so much for that context, Nick. I think that's really important to keep in mind. Yeah, let's look at a couple of examples of comments that have that people have done, and also there's lots of resources out there with all of this information, with kind of questions that to prompt. Oh, why isn't it not? Sorry. Okay. That like those kind of questions or prompts that you can address when you're looking at the documents. So there's resources that I can share out with everyone as well. It's not limited to this evening or what we're saying here. So this is an example. Well, first I'll show this. This is what Cascadia Wild is an example of what Cascadia Wildlands will submit. This was on the flat country timber sale, which is sort of near the QMS sale. This was a little bit different because it was an environmental impact statement. I just wanted to like show you, and again, I could send this, like how exhaustive we are with what we put in. And you are not expected to write this much stuff. But it can be really helpful to look at one of these that we've submitted before to get a sense of what we're saying in our official comments. This is an example of some folks who are down in the Umpqua watersheds who have been watching all of the post-fire logging along roadsides in the Archie Creek area. And this is a really great example of a super comprehensive comment that is done just by volunteers, a group of volunteers. But I just really liked how they kind of start with a narrative of what like the background is and what they found, kind of a highlight. And then they have these photos to back up what they've found. I like this in this photo, more than 100 feet from the road, the harvest with tree removed for commercial sale. So this was this comment was submitted after the logging had happened. So they were kind of going over what the agency had done wrong. So it's a little bit different, but I thought it was really, really great how they incorporated maps and just really great photos to back up what they had found, including, the trees that were harvested were old growth, very large trees with intact cambium. The sap was oozing and indicating that they were probably alive when they were cut. So like, just really blatantly expressing what they saw. Yeah. And then again, I can send this out to everyone if you want to look at it and refer to it. but embedding your photos and having captions and giving sort of a narrative. But again, this is also a pretty comprehensive 19-page long thing. So you're also not expected to do that. And maybe the Gradle Broads would consider compiling some of your field checking experiences and comments together into a report like this. But I think individual comments are best. So this is another example of, I think this is one that Sam wrote for like when she was the Cascadia Wildlands organizer, grassroots organizer, again at the Flat Country Project. And I think this is a really great example of like a very doable and like substantive comment that anyone can write who's a field checker. So she does a really good job of just saying, I visited the sale with a group of other volunteers. We explored this unit and this unit. This is what it says on the environmental impact statement, or in our case would be the EA. This is how old it says in the EIS, but what I found on the ground was or contradicts that. And then there's some examples of that with the photos. And then she goes on and like talks about her experience and day field checking these areas, and then all of the units that she's been to. And then finally at the end, she says, I urge you to adopt alternative 3, no regen harvest, et cetera. She's explicitly stating what she wants the agency to do. And then that's it. And then also I made this comment or like a template that everyone can use if you want. You don't have to. But the way that we're going to be submitting our comments for QMS is on this online portal that the Forest Service has. You can also turn in a handwritten letter, but just making sure that it's postmarked before December 10th, which is the deadline to turn that in.
And one other thing, if this project is big and it has a lot of elements, and so one of the things we've traditionally done too is you can request an extension, and if you need more time to like explore the area on the ground, and so that might be something worth considering too, is if you wanted more time to kind of go through the documents and kind of explore the project area on the ground after they've laid out the logging units, that's something you should feel free to request as well.
Yeah, although in this case, it's been 2 years and there's snow on the ground, so I probably wouldn't.
Yeah, true. Yeah. I could get up there, but so do you want me to pull up the Madeline, let me pull up the QMS EA for everybody. And then I think it would be a useful exercise to kind of, I can walk you through kind of some of the major sections of the QMS EA and kind of explain what those are and like what the implications are and kind of the best way to get at some of those pieces. Does that make sense to you all as kind of a thing that would be helpful? All right, let me try this.
And I don't know if we were going to try to get here in this workshop or not. I know it just came out today, but as far as the ask that we want to have, I mean, I know like with the extensive field checking information, we probably, we'll probably want to crosswalk that with the proposal for certain units where our ask is drop this unit because XYZ. But, is there an alternative that we prefer over another alternative and why, as far as what our ask is going to be? Anyway, I just thought that might be helpful to get at as well.
Yep.
Is Gradle Broads planning to write a group one, or are we doing this individually?
I think the idea was that Peg, who's on here, was going to write a group comment using information from other folks who have been out field checking. We'll probably need to get together again to work on that.
And just to reiterate, I mean, it is amazing that you guys are jumping in and doing this, but like, please don't be like super stressed about covering every little aspect. You know, like both Oregon Wild and Cascadia Wildlands and probably a number of other conservation groups are going to be putting out like very detailed technical comments on all of this. And so the things that you provide are, it is a full bonus for all of us. As I said, all of this can be used in litigation. All of it is helping build the record. The Forest Service is going to have to respond to all the issues you raise. But don't feel stressed out or pressured, or you know, this is a major help for us. So it's great. We appreciate it. So the first thing that I wanted to point out, one of the major, kind of one of the most important pieces of these NEPA documents is called the purpose and need section. And we can follow down. Are you guys seeing my screen? You guys can see this right now? Okay, great. And so you can see here, they lay out kind of 4 purpose and needs for the project. And classically, one of them is like generate timber volume. They have here like an increased stand growth and diversity. This is kind of how they justified logging in late successional reserves. If they thin, then the residual trees will grow faster and bigger, and then it's better owl habitat in the long run. That's kind of their argument. They have in here to create a diversity in structure and age class. And they've got a road network maintenance, which is probably a good thing. If they're doing that, they're probably looking at reducing the amount of roads. I haven't looked into this yet, but I assume some of the project is eliminating some roads. But with the purpose and need, one of the things that you can suggest through comments is you can proffer, hey, why isn't this considered as a purpose and need for this project? So you can call into question any of the fundamental driving assumptions for why the Forest Service is proposing this logging. That is actually a very useful thing. It's kind of hard to sue over in court because the agency gets considerable deference on how they shape the purpose and need. But with a purpose and need like this, it's pretty broad. And so it also is good fodder for like posing questions. Like one of the things they're going to say, they have in there the purpose need to create diversity in structure and age class. And that's going to justify a lot of their shelter wood harvest that they're proposing, and a lot of the gaps that they're proposing, like total areas of total tree removal. They're like, oh, we need some areas of early cereal habitat. And one of like, for example, one of the good questions you can ask is like, why do we need to create diversity and structure after the 2020 fires? Like, isn't there a lot of early cereal habitat? Like, what can you, across this watershed that you're analyzing, lay out, you know, with a graph or a table, like all of the different age classes? Because I bet they haven't finished that analysis following the fires. And so we can prove that they haven't taken a hard look at this and justifying this timber sale. So these are kind of just like good things that you can bring up and kind of try to poke at and get them to justify in response, which could be really useful. The other thing that you I'm sorry, I mean, we just got this today, so I haven't like fully worked through it, but one of the things that I noticed that's in this purpose and need area is they'll do a description of the existing condition and then the desired future condition. And this is also a really good area where your field notes can come into play and be super useful. So here's how they're justifying, this paragraph right here, this existing condition. This is how they're generally justifying logging in this late successional reserve, where the logging is only supposed to promote old growth values. And so you'll see in here, it's dense stocking. They kind of have generic ways in which they describe the forest stands at issue. And to the extent that you can document and provide photos and evidence that some of the stands they're targeting in the late successional reserves aren't densely stocked, or, you know, any of that is all useful. But it's something, this existing condition is usually framed by LiDAR satellite surveys. And so to the extent we're on the ground, it's an easy one usually for field checkers to poke holes in. The second thing if you really want to get into it and go deep into your comments, you can go to, they have in this table of contents, which I'll keep on going back to, they'll have forest plan and management direction. And so the way in which I would write comments, or Rebecca White in our office writes comments, or Chandra would write comments, is you go through the document with the relevant forest plans and management direction that I referenced earlier, and you're comparing what the Forest Service is proposing to do to the mandatory standards in the Willamette National Forest Plan and in the Northwest Forest Plan. As I mentioned before, you can see here there's the Willamette Forest Plan. This is from 1990, and then it was amended in 1994 by the Northwest Forest Plan. So both of these, you can probably find these plans online. I know the Northwest Forest Plan is online. I think the Willamette is as well. They should have PDFs. There's also survey and manage as well. That was but that's getting a little in the weeds. But yeah, if you're looking to do a deep dive, it's sometimes useful to look through. You'll see references to these plans throughout in their EA. And so if you have a PDF of these plans and you're curious and it influences an area you're writing comments about, you can go flip to the standard that they're talking about, and that can inform your comments and kind of questions going forward as well. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, which Chandra mentioned, is the alternatives, which are super important. And something that we have been successfully calling out in our lawsuits lately. So the way these documents are structured is they usually have a preferred alternative. Here it's called the proposed action. And then they'll have a list of other alternatives that they've considered. These are different management programs. And so, for example, I noticed in QMS, it looks like they're targeting forests for logging that are up to 180 years in age. Is that correct, Chandra? Something like that. And so you could, and the reason how they justify that is they classify mature forests as forests from that range in 80 years old to 180 years old. And that's like a big chunk of forest to generically classify that they should all need the same prescription. You know, a plantation that's 80 years old is gonna warrant, I don't know if it even needs in the first place. The Forest Service would argue that it needs logging because it's going to be densely stocked. That's going to be way different than a 180-year-old forest that's never been logged, that's fire regenerated and has a lot of snags and downed wood. And so one of the alternatives, you could propose. So one of the beautiful things with alternatives is the Forest Service is required to respond to and consider any reasonable or feasible alternative. So if you propose an alternative that involves no new road construction, and it was you can still, this way you're going to minimize your road volume in the watershed, and you can still generate some commercial timber volume, and it would minimize degradation in the LSR. So it's like that's a feasible alternative you could float to the Forest Service. If they fail to consider that in a meaningful way, we can sue over that and stop the project on that ground alone. So it's a really useful thing to point out and dive into. The one thing when you're proposing alternatives, the thing that you should reference is the purpose and need that I mentioned earlier. For an alternative to be feasible, it has to service the stated purpose and need that the Forest Service has floated. And so it's something to keep in mind when you're proposing an alternative. Like, for example, if you were to propose an alternative of building like a water park here, it would not be, the Forest Service would be like, well, that's not feasible. We don't need to analyze it because it doesn't generate timber volume. It doesn't reduce stand density. It doesn't, do all the things that they listed in their purpose and need statement. And then they can dismiss it out of hand. And so, if one of your comments is like, this should be a carbon reserve, you should add an alternative that makes this a carbon reserve. The Forest Service is going to dismiss that out of hand, being like, well, that doesn't address stand density, and that doesn't deal with creating different age classes, and it doesn't generate timber volume. But again, you can challenge the purpose and need itself. So you can raise issues being like, I think the purpose and need should be broader. I think we should consider this, this, and this. So don't feel like you need to limit yourself completely, but I just wanted to kind of put it in context for the way kind of attorneys use this stuff for an alternative to be feasible for us to get after it. You can, it has to be relevant to the stated purpose and need that the Forest Service provided. That being said, you can propose an alternative that's carbon reserve, whatever. You can also propose another alternative. You're not limited to proposing just one alternative for the Forest Service to consider. And so this is this little area, the proposed action and alternatives, is a great opportunity for you to offer solutions that the Forest Service, kind of in their ever shrinking worldview, has not considered. So this is an area legally too that has just been, as I mentioned before, has been very effective for us. The other thing you'll see within the alternative section is that they'll have a more in-depth description of the existing project area, like, and so I think they call it the affected environment. So that's something just to pay attention to. They'll have a existing condition section in the purpose and need that'll be pretty broad. They might get more specific in the alternative sections when they're describing the affected environment. They might even lay it out unit by unit in some circumstances. And so make sure to pay attention to that as well. I've been talking for a while. Are there any questions? I've got some more stuff to talk about, but figured just give you an opportunity. Did any of that like resonate with anybody?
Yeah, this is Peg, and Nick and I have a couple of questions, really about the hopelessness of arguing against their purposes and needs. There's very little concern that I could find in my quick reading for the value of forests in mitigating against climate change. There's a lot of published research that documents the value, particularly of federal forests, to do just that. And there are various initiatives that I know a little bit not enough about within the Forest Service itself that at least gives lip service to the value of that. How far afield is it useful to you for us to dig out those published research and initiatives within the agency? I don't want to spend a lot of time doing something that's not useful to you, but it does irk me that this 220 pages had a page and a half on climate change.
So the great question. That is what Doug Heiken has spent his life diving into. I think that is very useful. So I think you can frame it in terms of purpose and need. And I think you can cite to any one of Biden's recent executive orders or, any of that as grounds for why the Forest Service should have broadened their purpose and need to consider carbon and climate. And then one of the other claims frequently that we have as lawyers under the National Environmental Policy Act is called a hard look. I was going to get into this in a second, and so you just teed me right up, which is great. So in the different values sections, one of those values is, I don't, do they say it's like carbon or, let's jump to that now. So like for each alternative, they'll describe the affected environment and environmental consequences that'll have on that value. And you have here, one is climate change. That maybe they'll talk about carbon storage in there, I'm not sure. But normally they're copy and pasting that analysis from some other document that they've used. And it's this very abbreviated document that usually has, 2 pages of text that is usually founded on some like pretty poor assumptions that might conflict with the best recent science on that topic. So to the extent that if you're willing to do a deep dive and are interested in it, we have been kind of waiting to bring a big climate claim under NEPA against the Forest Service. And to the extent there's a really good administrative record where somebody has put a bunch of science into the record, pointing out kind of flawed assumptions by the Forest Service, that would be super beneficial and useful for us. So of course, that would be very, very good. And to the extent when you're submitting these comments, for any of you that have kind of any expertise in this area or former professional experience, you feel free to cite that in your comments as well, and note that you have experience dealing with these issues. It doesn't matter if you do or not, but note it if you do. The one thing I'll say, if you do cite scientific studies and go into it in that depth, I would attach those studies or submit those separately to the Forest Service. That just makes it easier for it to be in the administrative record. Otherwise, sometimes we have to fight over that.
Attach the entire publication or just a citation to the publication?
Attach the entire publication or an excerpt from that publication if it's like a massive thing.
Nick,
Yes?
this is Dave Stone with Friends of Douglas for a National Monument, where this whole thing is located. Last year, they were threatening to release the EA over the holiday season, and they agreed not to do that, or to extend the comment period for us. That never happened because they weren't ready to do the EA at all. And when it looked like it was going to happen again this year, I asked them again to, excuse me, extend the comment period. And they said, well, they're going to do it in November, which is what they've done. And I pointed out that this happens over the holiday season, and that the public is going to be busy with other stuff. And so I still want to make that objection that they did that now. Can I make that objection in the comments? And then is that they'll deny it. And is that objection something we can litigate on?
In short, no.
Okay. Thank you.
We still might be able to get an extension if.
Yeah, they might give you it. I wouldn't assume that they wouldn't give it to you. Yeah.
How do you make that request?
In writing.
Is that
Through
considered
email or an EA comment letter, just make sure it's in writing. So that's the only way.
so that's included in the EA draft comments?
You can do that as well too, yes.
Okay, so I just make an objection right now, and then also include it in my final comments.
Yep, I think that's, if they don't grant it, yeah.
Okay.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So what I'm gathering is that effective comments have to be quite specific with good documentation and citations to research and that kind of thing. If I just wanted to make a comment saying, you know, I'm concerned about the climate and I'm concerned about the watershed and I'm concerned about habitat, I mean, is that not effective?
No, that is absolutely. So those comments are good for building a record of public opposition. And so like that all goes in, and you know, the judge is going to see like, oh, all these people are concerned about these forests that they recreate in, or all these people are concerned about climate change and carbon storage and how we treat our forests, or they're concerned about fire risk to their community and like the effects of clear cutting. You know, like, so this is all, even generic comments like that are great for building a record of support for and against good or negative aspects of a proposal. And like the timber industry often does the same thing. And so they'll pump out bulk comments just being like, we should log more, we should, you know, like jobs or something. And so it's all part of a dance that's going on. It is valuable and useful. Don't feel like you need to do the deep dive, right? Like it's all helpful.
Okay,
So
thank
yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if Cascadia is planning to do this, but at Oregon Wild, we're planning to, do a big alert that goes out to thousands and thousands of people, right? To submit comments. You all are gonna, have more experience of actually being there mostly, and it's gonna be more specific, but we're gonna ask people to like essentially do just that, like load the record of public opposition with a couple of key talking points about things they should be doing instead, or whatever it is we decide to ask. But that's all it means, and it's probably going to be people who've never been there before, and it's still valuable to do.
Yeah, we'll definitely do a similar thing.
Thank you. That would be really helpful for someone like me who is not doing the deep dive, but to have the talking points or to share a document or something so that I could use that.
Of course.
Just a question. The Forest Service put together the QMS story map, which has a lot of details on the units. And
Okay.
like Unit 137, they redrew the boundaries, but on the EA, the Unit 137 boundaries are the original boundaries. And so, do I take the story? Can I say I like the way they've redrawn the unit in the story map, but that's not an official document, so I can't really reference it? Or, if they change the story map, I may not, I don't know how to use that.
So that is like a great thing to include in a public comment in general. So like if some of Forest Service documents that they're putting out are conflicting and confusing and like don't make any sense, point out those contradictions. And so this draft EA is their official document. That story map has kind of no legal effect for them. And so it's great to point out, hey, you're representing to the public that you responded to our field checking by curbing these unit sizes and boundaries. But then in the EA you put out, you didn't do that. Like this seems disingenuous. And that is an excellent thing to point out, and feel free again to like ask questions and be frank about when something is confusing or unclear. You don't need to like figure out the answer. You can tell the Forest Service this doesn't make any sense. And it's like, and that's equally as effective at pointing out that they haven't taken a hard look or really explored the issue. Because one of the aims of NEPA is public disclosure. It's to like inform everybody what's going on. If they're doing a horrible job of that or being intentionally vague or confusing, that's something that we should be pointing out and correcting.
So could I, like on a lot of the units I field checked, right on the boundary are some old trees, and in some of them on their story map it shows that those old trees are in the unit. Can I say, what are you guys doing about that, and then just take screenshots of the story map and say, look how your boundaries in the wrong place based on your own
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to point that out. Yeah.
Okay, will do.
I have a question.
Sure.
It has to do with the blending of letters. If I'm going to do a deep dive letter for my field checking, can I also write when Cascadia Wildlands and Oregon Wild puts out their action alert? Can I also respond to that, or am I only allowed one input?
No, you can have multiple inputs.
Okay.
Yeah. The one thing I will say with if people are putting together individual field checking things, one exercise that would be super helpful for the attorneys, because when we challenge these lawsuits, we're given every public document, every email, every correspondence, and it's normally like 40 to 50,000 pages, if not way more. And so it's like a lot, and we have to comb through that and pull out all the useful pieces within usually 3 to 4 weeks is what we have to like kind of go through that and figure out what we're going to rely upon for the whole lawsuit. And so if Great Old Broads has and is continuing to do this great field push, a little summary piece similar to what Umpqua Watersheds just did for our Archie Creek thing that Madeline showed as a template earlier, and she can probably email that around to folks. Kind of just an abbreviated best of hits would be incredibly useful for us to just be able to cite to one document in the lawsuit instead of throwing the judge all over the place to all these individual. I'd still do your individual submissions, please. That's super useful. But if you guys have the time and capacity, that would be very, very useful for me.
Are you saying to just like have all of the comments kind of like in one folder in one place that are coming from us?
That too is useful. What I was saying, in like, if there's like a compilation like one document you could submit to the Forest Service being like, here's a summary. We've submitted a bunch of individual field checking notes and data that we want you to take into account. Here's a summary of like those things and some of our major findings and discrepancies that we've found, you know, or something like that. If there is a capacity for that, that would be useful. I think useful for the Forest Service, and kind of one area where if this does go to court and we're talking to the judge, we can point them to like one main document that's really useful and submitted by Great Old Broads, you know, as opposed to having their clerks bounce around to like 20 different letters and submissions all over the record. But that's me being very picky and don't feel the need to actually do that.
At the very least, I did create a folder within the Google Drive that we have been, or some of us have been using to just like dump our photos and field notes into. And I put the comment template in there. If people just like wanted to, you don't have to, but if you could just take the comment template, make a copy, write your own comments, and then it would just all automatically be living in that folder. So then at least there's one folder where those documents exist.
Yeah, the one thing I'd point out, we had kind of years ago, kind of a folder where everyone was putting all their field notes, and then none of it got submitted to the agency. And then so none of it was in the administrative record, and we couldn't use any of it. So if you are putting stuff on some shared area and like using just make sure all of it gets to the agency. Real quick before, I think we're getting the one, I wanted to cover two more things. In all of these, so when the Forest Service is analyzing all these different values, there's forest and stand structures, soils, aquatics, riparian reserves. Remember, I think, again, asking questions about some of the conclusions that they draw. You can ask questions about the scale of analysis. Like for wildlife, they're going to be analyzing effects in the project area or in the actual timber units. And then with climate change, all of a sudden they'll switch to the world, because they like to frame it as a global issue to minimize impacts. And you'll see they'll do that with water too. They'll really widen the scope of what they're looking at. And they're not supposed to be doing that. They're supposed to keep a steady scale of analysis throughout. And so you can ask, why didn't you analyze it at the local scale? Like, what are the effects at the site specific scale? Can you enumerate those for me? Those are great ways to kind of pin the Forest Service down on some of these issues. The other section that is really interesting and really guides a lot of the project is this project design feature section. Do you guys see what I have here? And here they're going to get very specific into each of the units, and they're going to have these design features. These are what the Forest Service will rely upon many times to say that the project won't have a significant impact on the environment. And so to the extent that we can poke holes or draw questions about their different project design features, including like how they're going to ensure during implementation all of these features are being followed, these are also these are kind of good things to kind of go through and be like, because they'll be like, oh, we're using like mats and therefore we won't have any risk of landslide. And be like, how does that work? You know, like it doesn't. But I mean, I think one of the things is you can ask, like, where's the effectiveness? Like, what studies do you have to show that this project design feature results in like no risk of failure in unstable areas? And so this is a big section, and it is complicated. This is where it gets like starts to get a little more technical, but it is kind of one of those areas where a lot of the lawsuits kind of wind up is fighting over these project design features. To the extent that we can comment on these and pull them apart, especially when they're going to be relied upon for the Forest Service to say there's no significance. Yeah, it's a good area to zero in on as well.
So would comments like, you say this is a skyline logging system unit, but there's no roads there, so how are you going to get the logs out?
Yeah, and it's like, oh, are you gonna have to build a road landing? Like, oh, are you gonna block that? Are you gonna like dig that up and replant trees in that landing, or is that just gonna be left there? And yeah, all that stuff is great. All right, I'll stop. I'm starting to read this thing. I'll stop. What are other questions that people have before we sign off here?
Where do we get this document?
Oh, we can email it around. This is the Forest Service just sent out a email that had a little 2-page document being like, oh, the QMS EA has been released, and they had a link to this 120-page document in that email and on that little letter. I'm sure Madeline can email this all. She's got it too, so we can send this to all you guys too, so you have it.
Thank you.
Is commenting about roads useful? Some of the roads they say they're going to close are basically non-existent. So
yes, I think that's very useful, because
It's 6 o'clock.
they're going to justify some of their new road construction to facilitate logging by saying they're decommissioning all these existing roads, and to the extent you can be like, this isn't a road, you're going to pull apart their whole argument for building new roads to log new areas. And so that, because this watershed is way overroaded, like that is awesome stuff.
okay, great, I've got that.
I have another question about the contradictions among documents. And if I'm getting into the weeds, I can take this offline with you. But when I compare the purposes and needs to stated goals in the original NEPA legislation, they don't match up. And I imagine if I went into some of the other documentation, I mean, one of the key ones that they reference at the very beginning is a 1976 law that has been revised and added on to many times since in the last 48 years. Again, I don't want to waste your time or mine if these are unimportant bunny trails, but they are the thing that get under my skin.
Yes, I think one of the great things for kind of getting at their purpose and need is I think you can cite a lot of recent things, because their model for what they're doing is old and outdated on our national forests, right? And so that's clearly something to bring into the light and raise as an issue. One of the things you can also talk about, though, one of the effective ways I've found at poking holes in purpose and need statements is to look to the forest plan itself and look for, the forest plan has a bunch of goals and objectives. And a lot of those are going to be pretty good goals and objectives, right? For recreation and scenic views and like reducing invasive weeds and all this kind of stuff. And so to the extent when you're criticizing the purpose and need, you can reference those goals and objectives that are in their relevant forest plan. Even though it's old, it's from 1990. It won't have anything in there about climate change, unfortunately. That's one of the reasons why they're revising are attempting to revise the Northwest Forest Plan now. But that is a good way to approach that issue as well. I hope that made sense. So I think we're at 6 o'clock. Did people find this useful? Was this too in the weeds, or was this good?
Very good, thank you.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, and you have
the level of detail.
Okay, great, good. And you have Madeline's contact, you have mine. Chandra at Oregon Wild's going to be cranking on this too, and so is Doug Hyken over there. We're all going to be working on this together. So reach out to any of us with questions, especially Chandra, all the time. But no, I'm just kidding. But we are here to be a resource to you. That's like why we exist as an organization. So call us or email us. We will respond to you. And that's we love that you guys are involved in doing this. I mean, it's great on so many levels.
Can you put all of the documents, including the PowerPoint, in the Google Drive and the EA?
Yes. Yeah, I can
Okay.
put it all in that Google Drive and I'll send that out to everyone.
Great.
Mhm. Yeah, just to reiterate what Nick just said, thank you so much for engaging with this. It's really, really important. And yeah, we're always available and here. And also over the next 30 days or so, if it would be helpful to have another Zoom type kind of meeting like this where we're all maybe like working on our comments together and we want to like ask some questions or workshop some things together, we can totally make that happen. Just feel free to reach out or maybe tell Cindy that you want that and then she can ask me to put that together or something. So yeah.
And I have a quick question. It has to do with Chandra made the comment that Griddle Broads might be doing a group letter or individual letter. So I wanted to kind of hear from Chandra or just anybody to say, yeah, go ahead and do your individual letters now. And then we'll pull the group letter together later or something. I mean, I'm not quite sure how to get my head around that.
Nancy, this is Peg, and I'm brand new to all of this. I don't know if this is the right process, but it makes sense to me to pull the larger group letter together first and then offer individuals some talking points, key points that come out of that for people to use their individual letters with more emphasis or more power. Chandra, what do you think?
Or vice versa. I mean, with this sort of workshop, and we could do another one just, to continue on with Great Old Broads who have been out field checking. People could get in their individual comments, and then for the group comment letter, we could kind of take all of that data collected by all the field checking and, individual observations into a letter that will probably come a little bit later because it'll take more time to pull together. I'm not sure. I mean, and they also could just be on parallel tracks. People could be writing their own letters based on their observations and getting, their thoughts on the record, and then the group comment can be on its own.
So should we be thinking about doing our individual letters and then send to whom? Send to you or to Peg? Maybe send that individual letter to you guys and then you guys pull it together for the group letter. I mean, who would be our contact person?
Scares me to death for me to be that person, but I think I ought to be on the link, but not alone.
Well, for Great Old Broads, maybe we can get together soon and kind of hash that out on how we want to put something out to our email list as far as encouraging individuals to write comments. And then we can also work with Madeline and Peg and others who want to be involved on the group letter.
Okay.
Does that work?
Can I tell you how we're going to do it, friends and sir? This is very complicated issue to kind of coordinate on. So the first thing I did was I made a calendar to make sure that we got everything done in time. And I'm going to distribute that calendar and give people deadlines about when we need their comments, because we've got a number of people who have done field checking, and I want to incorporate their comments in our group comment. So I'm going to need those comments before a certain date so that I have time to incorporate them. There's a lot of steps that we need to consider. I need to get my board on board. So I made a calendar that said, okay, I need these comments by this date, and I'm going to circulate a draft, and I want them to respond by this time, et cetera, et cetera. So just think about how to get the timing right on all this and let me know what time you need to get these comments in. So that's
And friends, I got to jump off. I've got a cold, wet soccer game to go to. But thank you. And again, feel free to call or email if you need anything.
Thanks, Nick. And I'm going to end the recording now also. Yeah.